I came home and froze. My disabled sister's wheelchair ramp was gone, torn down and thrown away like trash. It was ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic, Mr. Harris, my neighbor said with a fake smile. They thought they could take away her freedom, but they didn't know that I'm the governor. And now, payback was coming. When I bought this house, I thought I had finally found the perfect place for my sister. A gated community with well-maintained lawns, spacious sidewalks, and silence, interrupted only by the occasional sound of passing cars. It was safe, peaceful, exactly how it should be for someone whose life was already full of limitations. Sophie was born with cerebral palsy. Since childhood, her world had been confined to a wheelchair, but she never complained. She loved life, strived for independence, and learned to overcome her challenges. But I knew that even the smallest obstacle could become an insurmountable barrier for her. That's why the first thing I did after moving in was install a ramp at the entrance. It was sturdy, reliable, built to code. I spent a lot of time and money to ensure that Sophie could go outside whenever she wanted, without any struggles. To her, it wasn't just a structure, it was freedom. But when I came home from work, that freedom was gone. I saw it from the road. The porch had no rails, no ramp, just a pile of broken wood sticking out of a dumpster and a few scattered metal pieces on the lawn. I stepped out of my car, frozen in place, as a cold chill ran down my spine. A heavy, sinking feeling grew in my chest. "What the hell?" I breathed, clenching my fists. At that moment, an elderly woman stepped out of the neighboring yard. She looked like she was heading to a formal event. A light gray pantsuit, neatly styled silver hair, a gold brooch on her lapel. Her face wore a pleasant smile, perfectly practiced yet completely hollow, like a luxury real estate agent trying to close a deal. She walked unhurriedly, calmly, as if she had nothing to fear. "Ah, Mr. Harris." Her voice was sickeningly sweet. "You must have received the HOA letter. We had to remove that illegal structure. You see, things like that ruin the neighborhood's overall aesthetic." I whipped around to face her. You did what?" "We removed it. It was necessary. The HOA maintains order." Her tone was even, almost condescending, as if we weren't talking about my sister's right to a normal life, but about a landscaping violation. My pulse pounded in my temples. A deep, unrestrained fury flared inside me. "You destroyed my sister's wheelchair ramp because it ruined the view?" She didn't even flinch. "The HOA protects the rules, Mr. Harris. You must respect them." I grit my teeth. I wanted to scream, to tear those HOA documents up, right in front of her. But I just stood there, feeling the fire burn brighter inside me. These people thought they could decide what was allowed and what wasn't. They thought their little community was the law everyone had to obey. But they forgot one detail. I wasn't just a new resident, I was the governor. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I spent the night at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, studying the HOA bylaws. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I kept reading, line by line, looking for any loophole. And then there it was. Any structure that disrupts the neighborhood's exterior appearance is subject to removal. Black and white. Clear as day. I clenched the papers in my hands, feeling my anger boil over. They didn't even bother to hide behind logic. They just wrote a rule that allowed them to dictate what was beautiful and what was unacceptable. A wheelchair ramp, a lifeline for a disabled person, was, in their eyes, an eyesore. My blood was on fire. I couldn't let these people think their power was absolute. The next morning, I headed straight to the HOA office. The reception area was designed to show off status: a massive oak desk, expensive leather chairs, rows of neatly arranged folders behind glass cabinets. Behind the desk sat a young woman with a perfectly styled hairdo and a forced professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harris. How can I help you?" "I need to speak to the HOA chairman, immediately." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Mr. Cross is expecting you. Please, go right in." Henry Cross sat in his office, leaning back in a large leather chair. He was pushing 60 and had the look of a man who had enjoyed control over this neighborhood for a long time, an expensive suit, a smug smile. "Mr. Harris." He spread his arms in a mock welcome. "I'm so glad to see you. I hope you're here with an understanding of our rules, not just complaints." I sat down across from him, wordless. "I want to know on what grounds my ramp was demolished." Cross smirked and leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "On the grounds of HOA regulations, Mr. Harris, the rules apply to everyone." "Are you telling me that a temporary wheelchair ramp violates the aesthetic of the neighborhood?" "Look," he said, his voice smooth, oozing condescension. "I understand that this is hard to accept, but if we make an exception for you, it will create chaos. Someone else will decide to paint their house bright pink. Another will want to install a swimming pool in their front yard. You see, we have to maintain order." I ground my teeth. "Are you seriously comparing a wheelchair ramp to a swimming pool?" He shrugged, still smiling. "Interpret it however you like. You should have read the HOA regulations before moving in." I stared at him, hatred boiling inside me. This man didn't even try to hide his indifference. To him, my sister was just an inconvenience, a violation, a flaw in his perfectly curated suburbia. But he didn't know one thing. I wasn't just a new resident. I was the governor. And now I had a new mission: to tear down this pathetic circle of snobs and their oppressive rules. The next day, I didn't go to the office. I didn't take any meetings, check my emails, or answer my calls. I had a different mission. Standing behind the curtains of the press hall, I could feel the fury boiling inside me. Sophie sat beside me in her wheelchair, her small, fragile hand clutching mine. "Are you sure you want to do this so publicly?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, my sister, the person I loved most. Her eyes held worry, but beneath it, there was hope. "I'm sure. These people think they can do whatever they want. They're wrong." I exhaled and stepped onto the stage. Cameras clicked. Bright lights blinded me. Rows of journalists sat silent, their microphones already pointed in my direction. I clenched my hands into fists and faced the crowd. Today, I want to talk about how a small group of people in power can destroy lives. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. My sister is disabled. She wants to live freely, just like everyone else. But our local HOA decided that her convenience ruined the neighborhood's aesthetic. So they tore down her ramp. The room exploded with flashing cameras. Journalists spoke over each other, but I raised my hand, silencing them. But this isn't just our story. I took a step forward. Across the state, dozens of HOA communities make unfair decisions, controlling how we live. They dictate what our homes, our yards, our lives should look like. They decide who deserves accessibility and who doesn't. I scanned the crowd, seeing the first signs of outrage on their faces. Today, it was my sister. Tomorrow, it could be someone you love, or you. Journalists exchanged glances. Some were already scribbling in their notebooks. I let the moment settle, then delivered the words that brought us all here. Today, I'm signing a new executive order. HOA communities will no longer have the power to ban accessibility structures. Furthermore, we will launch a full investigation into these organizations. If they violate people's rights, they will be held accountable. Sophie squeezed my hand tighter. The room buzzed with energy. Reporters rushed to their crews. News anchors started broadcasting live updates. The information spread instantly. Within hours, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I looked at the screen. Henry Cross. I didn't answer. A minute later, a message came through. "Let's discuss this. I'm sure we can find a compromise." I laughed. Now? Now that they saw the fire spreading? Now that journalists were digging into their past? Now that the residents were demanding answers? I deleted the message. The HOA called an emergency meeting to resolve the issue, but I no longer cared. I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to take back what belonged to me and my sister by right. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch, and there they were. Workers installing a new ramp, sturdy, metal, non-slip surface, reinforced handrails, and most importantly, permanent. Now, it was the law. I crossed my arms, watching them secure the final bolts. One of the workers, a strong, broad-shouldered man in a hard hat and orange vest, walked up to me, wiping his brow. "All set, Mr. Harris." I nodded. "Thank you." He smirked. "No, thank you. You did something that mattered." I didn't answer. I just looked at the ramp, standing as if it had always been there, exactly as it should have been. Sophie was the first to roll onto it. I stood beside her, watching as her wheels moved effortlessly across the metal. She looked at me, her lips curving into a smile. "Thank you, Eric." I felt something warm and heavy spread through my chest. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You've always been stronger than any of us." She scoffed, but I saw the glimmer in her eyes. She was no longer a prisoner in her own home. She could go outside whenever she wanted, and no one could stop her. As for the HOA, Henry Cross resigned. The moment the story spread across the state, residents filed complaints, by the dozens, demanding justice. His fear tactics no longer worked. People had seen his true face. At first, he tried to hold on, giving interviews, claiming he was acting in the best interest of the community. But no one believed him. When it became clear that an investigation was coming, he gave up. With him gone, the HOA lost its power. No longer a private club of elitist snobs, deciding who ruined the aesthetic and who fit the standards. Now, it was just a homeowners association, a council of residents, just like everyone else. They could no longer control other people's lives. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching the news, play on my living room TV. Every channel discussed the fall of one of the harshest HOAs. Journalists debated. Analysts broke it down. People shared their own horror stories about HOA abuse. Sophie sat beside me, a cup of tea in her hands. "Are you happy?" she asked. I looked at her and slowly exhaled. "Yeah." I did it. I protected what mattered, and justice had finally won.